Thank you, Mr. Speaker. It is an honour to rise in the House today and to speak to Canadians about my private member's bill, a bill that I believe is fair, a bill that will benefit all Canadians, and a bill that will foster a culture of generosity from coast to coast. Parliamentarians get very few opportunities during their time as elected officials to present legislation, so I count myself privileged to be drawn the first of MPs to introduce a private member's bill in this, the 42nd Parliament. It took a great deal of consideration to arrive at Bill C-239, the Fairness in Charitable Gifts Act, and I consider it important to take a few moments to explain how I arrived at this idea. When I found that my name had been drawn the first to present a bill, I quickly decided to gather information from my constituents. I asked for feedback. I consulted with individuals and organizations in my riding. The input I received was overwhelmingly clear. People wanted a law that would protect the rights of the unborn. So I did a little research. Here in Canada, there are no laws in place that protect the rights of the unborn child. There are no guidelines governing when and why a termination of pregnancy can be procured. In 1988, when the Supreme Court of Canada, in a divided decision, struck down Canada's existing law banning abortion, they also indicated that Parliament had the right to establish protection for the unborn child. In recent Supreme Court decisions overturning our laws on prostitution and euthanasia, for example, the Court directed Parliament to draft new legislation to protect the rights of individuals, while at the same time providing protection for vulnerable Canadians. Our current and past governments have risen to that challenge and have and are drafting legislation to meet these objectives. Unfortunately, past governments have not modernized human rights protections for individuals at early stages of life. We are among a handful of nations in the world which lack these protections. I believe this to be a serious failing on the part of previous governments. Many Canadians think that there are at least some regulations governing this issue, but that is simply not the case. Here in Canada, there tends to be a knee-jerk reaction to the word abortion. I'm sure some of you here and some of you at home felt some sort of immediate reaction or emotion as you heard me speak the word. It has been a polarizing issue in this country, and the word has various associations for every individual. This became apparent to me when I was originally crafting a private member's bill that would have at least aligned our laws with that of our allies in other developed countries. However, after a great deal of discussion and consultation, it became apparent to me that I would not be able to garner sufficient support from the honourable members in this House, despite the strong commitment many of my colleagues show towards protecting the vulnerable. I recognize that a private member's bill updating these protections would not become law at this time. If Canada is going to continue to be a nation that is blessed, I believe that it must draft and pass legislation that protects the rights of women, which was unanimously upheld by the Supreme Court, but it must also provide for protection for the unborn child. I think that we need to start a national conversation. I believe that we as Canadians are capable of discussing this issue with open hearts, informed minds, and ultimately come up with the right solution. No law is not a solution. However, Mr. Speaker, there are things that we can all agree on. And so I changed directions. And I sought out an issue that would make a difference, but one that could be supported by all parties in this House and by all members of all stripes of political affiliations. I decided to draft Bill C-239, the Fairness in Charitable Gifts Act, a bill that would correct the considerable gap between federal tax credits given for donations to political parties and individuals, as opposed to federal tax credits given for donations to charities. Feeding politicians, Mr. Speaker, should never be more important than feeding the hungry, than healing the sick, than educating the poor, or restoring the brokenhearted. This is not right. It's not fair. And I do not believe that our current tax treatment of charitable donations reflects our Canadian values. The work that charities do is indispensable. There are many people who benefit from the services that they provide. Charities change lives, Mr. Speaker. Organizations that depend on charity of community to function have a unique feature. That is, they are directly accountable to their donors. People that donate their time and their money to support a charity directly are more engaged with the effectiveness of that charity. This generally has resulted in both efficient and accountable charities. Mr. Speaker, I ask the members of this House, are there any of you who have been through the heartache of watching a family member or a close family friend slowly lose a battle to illness, a time when you relied on the charity and kindness of others to help you through that difficult and painful time? Are there any of you who have witnessed the incredible blessing of seeing a friend or a loved one beat a terrible illness due to advancements in medical research? Are there any of you who have benefited or have family members who benefited from a university scholarship? Are there any of you who have had children who attended a summer camp where they developed new skills and built lasting relationships? Or are there any of you whose children are involved in the arts community through music, theater, and dance and other pursuits? Are there any of you who have experienced the joy of giving your time and money to help a charity that you deeply believe in, and you've seen the changes in people's lives and circumstances? Mr. Speaker, I think that we can all agree that we've been touched in many ways by the great work that charities have provided to our communities. Make no mistake, government provides much needed help to Canadians who are struggling. But let's be honest, government can't do it all. We in this House can't do it all. There are many gaps in our system, and charities fill those gaps. Every single day and night across Canada, charities provide food for the hungry, beds for the homeless, help to the hurting, support for the aging, and hope to the sick. Charities advance science and medical research, and charities promote education and care for our environment. Charities, especially faith-based, have been very instrumental in the resettlement of refugee families. Charities are invaluable. However, despite this incredible impact that charities have had on our lives and our country, the fact remains that Canadian charities are faced with an aging and ever-declining donor base. In fact, the number of Canadians donating to charities has been on a long-term decline. Right across the country. Mr. Speaker, the percentage of tax filers claiming charitable donations has fallen from a high of almost 30% to just over 20% over the past 20 years. I fear that should this trend continue, Canadian charities that provide important services will be forced to close their doors. When surveyed by Stats Canada, the number one reason that people have stated that they don't give more is because they simply could not afford to give a higher donation. This was the reason given by 71% of Canadians surveyed. Given the trends in charitable giving, I believe this bill to be especially important now, Mr. Speaker. With only a little over 20% of Canadians donating, this is a bill that could re-inspire Canadians and continue to foster that culture of generosity, a characteristic that I believe is Canadian and is central to our country and its people. This bill would make it more affordable for Canadians to donate to charitable causes. So how do we accomplish this? How do we encourage Canadians to get into the practice of making regular charitable donations? Mr. Speaker, as you are likely aware, an imbalance exists on how different types of donations are treated in Canada. Federal tax credits for political contributions, and make no mistake, my colleagues, that's us here in this room, in this chamber, far exceed federal tax credits that are available to donations made to charities. I hope we all agree that this is just not right. I am proposing to correct this inequity with my private member's bill, the Fairness in Charitable Gifts Act, Bill C-239. With this bill, donors to registered charities would receive the same generous federal tax credits that donors to political parties currently receive. This will provide the largest incentive to the largest segments of the population, those who currently donate under $400 per year, as those who currently do not donate at all. If we accomplish this, your favorite charities, and indeed charities all across Canada, will benefit greatly as more dollars will be freed up for donations. This will make it easier for small donors to become large donors and for people who do not currently donate to start. Here's how it works. Under the Fairness in Charitable Gifts Act, Canadians donating to registered Canadian charities would receive the following: a 75% tax credit, federal tax credit, on the first $400 of total annual donations, a 50% federal tax credit on the next $350 of total annual donations, and a 33 1/3% federal tax credit on total annual donations over $750. These federal tax credits would now be in line with the federal political tax donation credits. The same percentage benefit at the same threshold. Now that's fairness. Mr. Speaker, allow me to give you just one real-world example of how charities really do make a difference. Cliff and Jen Friesen live near the small town of New Bothwell, Manitoba, in my riding of Provencher. They are a close, hard-working family of 5, but sadly, there used to be 6. They, like many Canadian families, have been touched by tragedy. Their young son, Cash, passed away 3 years ago from a brain tumor at the age of only 2.5. Of course, the family was devastated, but they have resolved to ensure that Cash's death from cancer was not in vain. The family has experienced tremendous support from various charitable organizations, both while they were going through Cash's illness, after he passed away, and after he passed away. And some of these charities include the following. The Canadian Cancer Society, they help Cash receive chemotherapy at home in a safe and familiar environment, as well as provided the family with all the information they needed for this difficult road that lay ahead of them. The Children's Hospital Foundation of Manitoba provided state-of-the-art equipment and medical research. The foundation also provided toys for Cash and the other children to play with to help ease their fears while going through treatment. The Candlelighters Childhood Cancer Support Group. This charity made it possible for the family to go on special outings for Cash. They organized movie days, trips to the local amusement park, and a trip to family camp, where Cash and his family could meet other families who were going through the same struggles. In fact, they're still providing support to this day. Maranatha and the Word of Life Church in Niverville. These two churches made it possible for Cash's parents to spend large amounts of time that were needed while tending to Cash in the hospital. The members of these churches stocked the family's refrigerator and freezers with food and supplies to help ease the burden. The church members made sure that Cash's siblings had lunches prepared for school, and of course they provided emotional and spiritual support. The Make-A-Wish Foundation made it possible for the family to take Cash to Disney World just 3 weeks prior to his passing. The trip together as a family is a very special memory which they will cherish forever. And finally, Southland Church in Steinbach. The Southland Church provided Cash's family with a venue for the funeral at no cost and assisted a great deal of help with the funeral planning. They also provided full pastoral care, including emotional, spiritual support, and grief share counseling. By raising federal donation tax credit simply to the level that we as politicians enjoy being able to offer to our donors, we can accomplish this. Charities all across Canada will benefit greatly as more dollars will be freed up for donations. Mr. Speaker, I've only highlighted one aspect of charity in this previous story, but charity is much bigger than that. There are many types of charities, and charity touches every aspect of our Canadian life and culture. The changes that would take effect under the Fairness and Charitable Gifts Act provide a very powerful incentive that would encourage more Canadians to give to the charities of their choice. If trends in charitable giving continue and if the donors of charities begin to close, more government programs will be needed to fill that gap. This means that people will pay more in taxes and have less control over how their money is spent. Not only that, but people will suffer as they lose the indispensable support that charities provide to people that need it the most. Charities exist to help, to educate, to advocate, and to provide valuable research and development. They are an integral part of Canada as we know it. To summarize, Mr. Speaker, the Fairness and Charitable Gifts Act will level the playing field between donations to political parties and donations to registered charitable organizations. It will encourage charitable giving by offering a more generous federal tax credit. It will increase the number of Canadians giving to charities. It will strengthen and empower charities. It will make it easier for small donors to become large donors and for people who do not currently donate to start. It will reduce the burden on government social services, thus freeing up public resources for other important priorities. We need to put an end to a system that is both unfair and unjust. Feeding politicians should never be more important than feeding the hungry, Mr. Speaker.
Here.
This is a bill for all Canadians, and I believe a bill that can be supported by all parties in this House. Mr. Speaker, I ask parliamentarians across the country and from across party lines to support Bill C-239, the Fairness and Charitable Gifts Act. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.